Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
Well, Gerundir is flashier than I would have expected. Just look at that massive medallion. Wait, or maybe it's a wearable milk tart for snacking on the go. Shame about the beer there. Welcome to this Norse-inspired world that's experiencing some chaos. Their deities are dead, and the sun is stuck in the sky. It's falling apart, literally. A world occupied by humans and Varl, and all of their lives have been upended by humanoid stone-clad creatures called the Dredge, as well as other horrors, some of whom can be quite cute. So masses of people have to mobilize and flee their homes to safety. And believe me, across 3 games they get their steps in. Through snow and bog, water and purple. They really go against their stereotypically sedentary natures. But hey, the threat of getting brained will do that to you. And the sights you'll see in glorious 2D, at least when you're marching. The backgrounds have a very sharp quality when it comes to the cliffs, and the trees can be composed of thin, sometimes unnaturally straight branches to present like an ornate carving. The character close-ups are hand-drawn and sumptuous, usually with one accenting tiny animation. Periodical flapping of fabric in the wind, that kind of thing. Such hard expressions. The developers even named Stoic. Here's the closest thing to a smile in the entirety of the game, I believe. I suppose their world being ripped from them can make you a bit less than chipper. I mean, it's not ambitious graphically, but it looks lovely. Arguably, they do a lot with little. And these visuals stay pretty much the same through all 3 games. Maybe a few more visual flourishes, fire animations, etc. Maybe some of the new characters have a bit more detail, or a bit more gilded, dress fancier, gold pins and bear hair, but that's a maybe. You won't notice much of a difference. If I had to criticize the visuals, sometimes the arenas are a bit plain when they don't have a nice border visual or anything really going on in the middle, for instance when you're just fighting on snow, but that isn't always the case. And the games do have an orchestral soundtrack that deliver the appropriate epicness. It's percussion and horn heavy, although not necessarily in a triumphant way. A lot of times it gives a feeling of danger and hopelessness, dread. At the very least, it's somber. At its most upbeat, it sounds dramatic at best. Less musical and grim at its worst, and the closer you come to the end of the trilogy, it gets made worse, gets discordant, fits with some other story-related chaos. I believe your only musical respite is silence, when things are quiet with some ambient noise. Generally, those are the safest moments. I'd say the music is good. If this epic big sound just feels familiar, but that may just be a knee-jerk thing. It's quite complex at times, actually. Uniquely composed, maybe? So altogether, it captures the reality of the situation. A very grim one. Your caravan will constantly be escaping and have no end of problems. And you, as the leader, will have to choose the course of action. Choices that can lead to the deaths of clanspeople, fighters, and Varl, or recruiting more of them. Losing supplies or gaining, affect your caravan's morale, which will impact how well they fight, gain equipment, or renown to level up your characters. Certain decisions can even lead to the deaths of playable heroes. And sometimes the decisions can have far-reaching consequences. I believe there's quite a big example of a decision you make in Game 1 that has a pretty big impact on Game 3. So try and lead them well, it's probably worth it. Sometimes it can be easy to load and redo choices as many times as you need to experiment, but other times the autosave feature kicks in right after you make the choice, and the previous save location can be pretty far back. May even require you to redo a fight. Maybe that encourages forward momentum, accepting your choices, at least to an extent, but maybe the decisions regarding clan warfare have a little bit of shallowness to them, because in the first one, it always seemed as though charging headfirst into battle saved the most clanspeople, and it offered more renown reward when you stayed on the battlefield battered and bruised as the reinforcements showed up. And that kind of aggression still paid off in the later titles if it wasn't as effective. And probably some of the emotional attachment is lost if one of the approaches seems better, it's less of a choice. I haven't experimented much with other decisions, but in all fairness, I didn't have to. Clan warfare opportunities do get fewer the further in the journey we get, I believe, being replaced with fights that just involve your party. I mean, in the third game, in like half of the story, you don't even keep a tally of a caravan anymore. But from the second game onward, I do believe these options give more obvious tactical benefits. You lead this large force, and you will go against the morals you want to follow in order to secure a better result for the caravan. For instance, fewer deaths, etc. At least when the outcome was bad enough compared to the difficulty of said choice, creating a bit of obsession on my part to load and remake the choice. But as mentioned, sometimes you just get too tired to do that, and eventually you probably will just decide to follow your own gameplay alignment, in my case goody goody, while trying to ignore at the very least the minor setbacks, or delightfully just make the hard choices in a more organic way, just to be safe. I do believe the emotions kick in more during the more defining moments of the journey, when the implications of knowing these people and struggling for them for such a long time fully comes to bear. The game slingshots a lot too. I'm guessing that your choices can lead to the caravan's death, but I think the game adapts to your situation as well, at least in the first one. I mean, what are the odds that we're so evenly matched time and again? But the choices are fun and the caravan is the score. Ow, that's a penalty. See, you're up, you're down, lose friends, gain some more. Altogether, the game's system of choice can on the one hand be very dry and practical in a gameplay kind of way, but my obsession may indicate that the game does a good enough job of making you care about this set of numbers and emotionally connecting you to the caravan. But hey, let's move on to killing things. It's turn-based combat with a square grid. The first title in the franchise is the most bare bones in this respect. Fewer environmental obstacles and flourishes on the battlefield. And then from the second one onward, you get more of those, and thus a few more tactical choices. Each character has a movement range, you attack or use an ability, and each character has their own stats and passive ability too. Exertion determines how many focus points you can use during an attack, and focus determines how many focus points you have in the pool. And rather uniquely, there's the strength and armor system. Armor, as you'd expect, blocks incoming damage, and strength determines your damage as well as your health. The lower your health, the less damage you deal, and the higher the disparity between attacking health and defending armor is, the higher the odds are of an attack just being deflected. And there's even a stat for breaking armor, for attacking it directly. Cool mechanic, but I find that bleeding them white is the way to go because they still take turns, but can't really damage you. At best, they'll be able to do armor damage, thus wasting one of their turns. But once again, fun nonetheless. Arguably, there are too many playable characters in the game that divert renown and leveling focus. I believe you will ignore most of them, as I did. I guess use them, don't use them, it's up to you. And to the developers' credit, they didn't take the easy way out when making the sequels, restarting the leveling system. They found a decent enough way to scale it up. Once you reach a certain point, you stop talking in hard numbers and start adding percentage chances. Arguably weaker than a sure thing, but I think it's more here to keep you invested in the RPGing side of things, because as you can see here, my late game squad was all over the place. Maybe you kind of didn't need these extra boons. Story-wise, the world building is lovely, how the different species were created, the history of their wars, and finally, a massive map that even contains places you will never visit, complete with lore. It's a lot and optional, so you probably won't read it all, but it's nice that it's there. You know where you are in the world. Care about it, even though you don't choose where to go, for the most part. The story can feel like a succession of survival choices, because that's what it is, but there are some lovely dramatic turning points, and nice descriptive prose. Fair warning, most of the game is not voiced over, you have to read, but it really helps to craft a haggard atmosphere. Rook's face is fixed in a 1,000-yard stare, a feature he retains from the start of the journey. They managed to stay quite clean in spite of the troubles though, if their hair is less of a priority. Lastly, the games do show a little bit of unrefinement as the series progresses. I didn't notice anything in 1, not really, but in 2 I saw some screen elements popping, maybe saw some text issues and the odd crash. On their own, each one of these titles isn't the longest turn-based strategy game. I estimate the first one took me about 18 hours. That's a bit of a conservative estimate. The second one took 16, and the third one 13. As into that, they may have been running out of steam. But that means as a trilogy, it has a fair length, because in its entirety it took me about 47 hours, which is pretty good if you take the trilogy as a single game, as I have. And the games are kind of cheap on Steam. I bought them piecemeal, but you can get them as a trilogy by buying the deluxe pack. Unfortunately, this includes the soundtracks, but it's a fairly clean way of purchasing them all at one go. And that costs 1,095 Rand 29 cents. But I believe I have seen it go on sale for 164 Rand 33 cents. That's 3 Rand 50 cents per hour of gameplay, which is good. I've seen better, I've seen worse. You may be able to get a better deal piecemeal. And to download all 3 games is a little bit of an ask. First title takes up 3.11 gigabytes on the hard drive. The second takes up 5.1. And the final game takes up 4.66 gigabytes on the hard drive, which is about 12.87 gigabytes on the hard drive altogether, which isn't that bad if you still consider them 3 different games. But the game does work on the Warhorse quite well. Later on there were maybe jolts when I transitioned between characters, like as low as 23 frames per second when a new turn starts, especially the camera pans. But other than that, usually during combat you can get between 58 and 61 frames per second. Dip to 52 during Tempest, gets quite choppy during leveling, as low as between 22 and 24 frames per second. But during the city view and talking, you get around 59 to 61 frames per second. So yes, I would say it's quite playable. And this test was done on the third one. Theoretically, the most taxing of the 3. And stereotypically, it's kind of kid-friendly. There is violence, but it isn't really graphic. But it does have grim descriptions and sounds, some suggestive dialogue, mythological swearing and crassness, oddly saying she won't be followed because she's a woman, some humor based on how strange and quote-unquote crazy some of the characters are, but some kids can handle it. The game has good visuals, nice serious hand-drawn visuals, a cartoon depiction of haggard people never smiling, plus the backgrounds have a nice angular quality to look at while you see the banner wafting. Good orchestral music to denote the appropriate epicness, not really triumphant, more dreaded, dire, otherwise somber, silent, to make sure there's no question about it. We're not having a fun time. If you really wanted to criticize the music, maybe at times it can be a bit more familiar, especially when the horns bring the epic. But as said, maybe that's not reasonable. In fact, it's uniquely and cleverly composed enough. I didn't realize in the third game of this series, inspired by Vikings, musically employs a didgeridoo. The sound design is good too, robust and beefy. It's an affecting long journey with plenty of choices. Fun, but they can be lacking in emotion. It's more case by case, almost like a mathematical gaming practice. You'll redo them when they're easy to redo. I think I sided with an angry mob, even though it didn't really match up with my goody-goody personal alignment, for the sake of a better outcome. But you do get tired, and probably will become a bit more relaxed about them, a bit more natural, especially when the choice is harder and perhaps more meaningful. I found the turn-based combat very fun, the brutality of the noises as mentioned, stripping them of armor, and then really getting a good blow in. Sometimes using abilities well to deal damage to multiple people, etc. But sometimes the tactics kind of boil down to bleeding them white. It has a nice grim atmosphere of survival, although things slingshot a lot to keep you on the hook. Up, down, over and out. It has great world building, probably more than you'll see, and the story has nice dramatic moments. But a lot of times it's less of a story and more survival choices and consequences than a plot. But there are nice optional discussions with your party members, and even though these characters seem quite stoic, perhaps simply because of the limited amount of animation, they quite often get vulnerable. On the maybe side, there are a lot of playable characters that divert focus and XP expenditure. You probably won't use most of them. Plus, it arguably has visual novel levels of reading and few voiceovers. And on the con side, unrefinements are present. The game is too graphically polished for them to detract too much, but they can be noticeable. The popping and crashes especially. Maybe in general you get the feeling that the development team was running out of steam. Maybe that's a harsh assumption to make based on the fact that the games got shorter, warfare faded away, and the unrefinements weren't really present in the first game. Come on, play it. And be distracted during your conversations with Raga by wondering whether that's a tattoo on his face, or did he just fall asleep and get drawn on by one of those felt tip pens they use in butcheries. Is that where his hand went?
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.